Well, ladies and gentlemen, one thing that the claps on the last one needs a little bit more energy. Can we hear that? Thank you. I think we are tired from last night. I did ask you to clap a lot last night. But this just shows that we're here, we're alive and breathing, and we appreciate the time of the person who has come and spoken with us. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Habib Siddiqui is another one who could make it here today. He is an activist whose efforts are focused on improving human rights and creating a just and equitable society. He has tirelessly championed the cause of the disadvantaged, the poor, and the forgotten ones. Dr. Habib has authored 11 books, 5 of which are available on Amazon.com. He couldn't be here today, but we have Ghazali Sahab's grandson, Imaad Ghazali, who will read to us his notes. Please warmly welcome Imaad Ghazali.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to be reading the book review by Dr. Habib Siddiqui. Yeah, is that better? In 1978, Professor Edward Said's book, Orientalism, was published. It was a groundbreaking critique of the Western historical, cultural, and political perceptions of the East by the late Columbia University professor. Nearly 4 decades after its first publication, the book remains a modern classic. In this wide-ranging, intellectual, vigorous study, Professor Said traced the origins of Orientalism to the centuries-long period during which Europe dominated the Middle and Near East, and from its position of power defined the Orient simply as other than the Occident. In August 2003, nearly 23 months after 9/11, writing for Al-Ahram Weekly Online, Professor Said wrote, "I wish I could say the general understanding of the Middle East, the Arabs, and Islam in the United States has improved somewhat, but alas, it really hasn't." He was referring to his seminal work, Orientalism. The trillion-dollar question is that we must ask today is, has the situation improved since 1978 or even 2003? The answer is provided by veteran journalist Mr. Abdus Sattar Ghazali in his book, Islam and Muslims in the 21st Century. He shows us that our world is more divided politically and ideologically today than ever before, despite the fact that we are more connected virtually via electronic alternative media. American forces, till this day, about 17 years later, are still invaded and occupied the country. Iraq is a mess since American invasion and subsequent occupation, defying world opinion, including the UN in 2003, with millions of displaced folks everywhere. Thanks to the neo-imperial manipulation, the country may eventually get divided along ethnic lines, with Kurds getting their own states, and the North creating further tension in the region, especially with Turkey, which has a sizable amount of Kurds in the East. Syria is in a civil war. Millions have been forced to seek refuge in nearby countries, including Western Europe. A new nemesis, Daesh, also known as ISIS, replacing Al-Qaeda, falsely claiming to be Islamic and religious, has appeared in the bloody scene to further complicate the scenario and resurrect old Orientalism with the fabric of Islamophobia. Like the RAND robots in the United States, the ISIS robots are doing the best to terrorize everyone, redefining the clash of civilization, us against them. Not accidentally, the vast majority of victims have been Muslims. While covering Islam and Muslims, the Western media continue to apply negative images and characterization for Muslims. Islamophobia is sold as an elixir these days by those who want to expedite the Armageddon. President Eisenhower's fear of industrial military complex is no longer a myth, but has become somewhat of a reality. Regional unrest is not only tolerated, but it is encouraged to solidify the control of all those involved within the war industry. Mr. Ghazali quotes a RAND study, December 2004, that suggests that Sunni, Shia, Arab, and non-Arab divides should be exploited to promote the U.S. policy objective in the Muslim world. According to Mr. Ghazali, Islamophobia is systematically promoted and financially supported in the United States in the form of books, reports, website, blogs, and carefully crafted points that are well funded by hate groups. Islamophobia has essentially become the neo-Orientalism of the 21st century. Not surprisingly, the self-proclaimed Islamic expert Stephen Emerson collected $3.39 million for his for-profit company in 2008 for researching alleged ties between American Muslim and overseas terrorism. Mr. Ghazali shows that 39 years after the publication of Professor Sayyid's book, Orientalism, modern imperialism never ended. While its goal to maximize benefits remains the same, its method to achieve the goal has changed. It wants division along the fault lines, territorial, tribal, ethnic, or whatever, so that the Muslim world would remain weak. The RAND study released on March 18, 2004, apparently unveils the neocons' plans for global revamping of Islam as a result of the meticulously planned and organized onslaught against Islam. Professor Sayyid observed that the Muslim world has slipped into an easy anti-Americanism that shows little understanding of what the U.S. is really like as a society. In spite of the evil plan of its enemies to turn our world into a war zone and killing fields, the Muslim world needs serious introspection by its genuine, enlightened intellectuals that can diagnose its plethora of illness that had transformed it into a world of zeros in the global arena. Mr. Ghazali reminds us that the particular way the political development has taken place in the Muslim countries have created elite groups that care only about themselves, in which there is no share for the ordinary masses. They are for self-aggrandizement and don't mind selling the interests to the people of the highest foreign bidders. No wonder the Muslim world has so many of these self-serving puppets, despots, and autocrats ruling its people who have no fear of accountability either for God or his creation. Will that scenario change anytime soon? Mr. Ghazali's book is a treasure trove that delves into problems and challenges faced by the Muslims of the 21st century by filling in the void left open after Professor Sayyid's death. I strongly recommend it. This comment was written by Dr. Habib Siddiqui. It was published by Asian Tribune, Media Monitor Network, and Milli Gazette of New Delhi. Thank you.
Thank you, Imaad Ghazali, and I hope that you'll continue to participate in such forums in the future as well. I thank you personally, and great applaud together one more time. Ladies and gentlemen, we're almost coming to the close of the first session, and our last speaker is none other than our most favorite, Dr. Abdul Jabbar Sahab, who is a professor who came to America in 1965 as a Fulbright scholar. He has taught English literature and interdisciplinary courses for 36 years at City College of San Francisco and has served as visiting professor at UC Berkeley. He has designed and taught several courses over the past several years and continues to teach literature and Middle Eastern studies as an emeritus professor. We are very fortunate to have amongst us and in our community a distinguished man of this caliber. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. Abdul Jabbar.
thank you, Tashi Bhai, for that very gracious introduction. And I really appreciate your very inspiring words to all of us about getting involved and taking a share of responsibility that all of us need to do. And I'm very grateful for all the other presentations directly and also through presentation in absentia. And they're all very important and very good coverage of our friend Abdus Sattar Ghazali's book. Long time ago, a British statesman, author, put books in 3 categories. He said some books are to be tasted, others to be swallowed, and a few to be chewed and digested. So the beauty of Ghazali Saab's book is that it can be placed in all those 3 categories. So he is proving Francis Bacon wrong that it can be only in 1 category. So you can taste it. If you want to look at Orientalism, you can just look up in the index and go to the pages. Index is a wonderful resource for people who just want to taste the book. If you want to look up The Clash of Civilization by Huntington, you can find it easily without having to go through the whole book. So for me, it was not a book to be tasted or swallowed, which means speed reading. For me, it was a book to be slowly chewed and more slowly digested. I am still working on that because there is so much. There is so much in this book, so much of fact-finding. Brother Ghazali has done so much work over decades. I am afraid that I can't keep up with the speed of his writing books. I have to keep up with reading the books. So please don't write one in the next 2 weeks. So I wrote down a few comments, and when you come at the end, one responsibility you have is not to bore the audience with repetition of what has been covered. So I will avoid that repetition. Some of that I had in mind to talk about, but I'm glad it has been covered. As an example of some gathering of very important information, I'll read a few passages from his book. And actually, 1948, around that time, there was a policy statement, and the policymaker was George Kennan. That's a long time ago. And Ghazali Saab mentions that it's very important because everything that has come after that, like the RAND report of 2004, they're all variations on the same policy. So it's important to know what was going on in the minds of those policymakers. And let me share with you in the author's own words what was at that time the policy articulated by this person by the name George Kennan. Before I read from his words, I think it's a very similar passage is by Khalid bin Said. And this is a very dense and very important paragraph. If you have the book and you want to look it up, it is on page 21. For proof that I read the book from cover to cover, I brought my notes to honor the author. Okay, on page 21, this is what I want to share with you. to borrow Khalid bin Said, the author of Western Dominance and Political Islam, most of the Muslim countries are ruled by vicious, friendly tyrants. Vicious to their own people, friendly to superpower. Surrounded by a predatorial, narrow elite group. All the West has done is enter into private deals with tyrants, pamper the elite groups, and leave the rest to them. The latter, that is the elite groups, would do most of the exploiting and present wonderful profits on the platter to the particular great power. Convergence of interests between the first world's own gainers and the third world dictators and elites lead to collusive deals between the two that are facilitated by the government of the developed nations, which are ever ready to play power games. Ruling cliques in league with vested interests exercise power without accountability. Islam is used often as an instrument for preserving and perpetuating status quo. That's very heartbreaking, and that's because it's very true. And it is the policy even today. When I teach a couple of classes on the Middle East and Islam, one class that I teach is politics of the Middle East, a very hot subject, a lot of attempt to stop the course from being offered, a lot of lobbies preventing the truth to be told. Just 2 days ago, I came across a statement by someone that the only places where you could find the truth and facts will be the classrooms, because the media is very highly compromised. They are, if they want to tell the truth, even then they cannot, because they are funded by some lobbies. So when I teach these classes, I use the words, that's my own idea, indirect colonialism. Okay. Colonialism ended, but it was replaced by indirect colonialism. What does it mean? Well, it is the local leaders of these third world developing nations who continue to do the same thing that the colonial powers were doing. The same education system. They don't want the youth to be enlightened, because then they will start questioning authority. What Keenan said was that very much similar. He said we should get rid of the sentimentality of human rights. That should not come into play in our policy making. Human rights and all these impractical things should be forgotten. We have to, he said, we have 50% of the world's wealth and only 6% of the world's population. And our job is to maintain this disparity. We should continue to have policies that will not interfere with this power we have. I don't blame them, you know. Every superpower does that. So the problem is not with them. Yes. The problem is with us. What do we do? How do we not give others the words, power to represent us? I was really happy that Ghazali Sahab, you put in your book as Appendix A or Appendix 1 an article by Dr. Ali Shariati, the Irani philosopher who studied in France in the best schools came back to Iran, wrote wonderful books of philosophy. Like Allama Iqbal, he was educated in Europe. He wrote his PhD on a French philosopher in Germany. So he was very well informed. He taught at Oxford University, but he went back. Shariati similarly came back. The reason I like that idea is because that is the only part in the book where I found some hope after heartbreaking rendition of the truth. I was looking for some hope somewhere, and that came in the form of the article by Ali Shariati. Unfortunately, he died very young, and this is what he says. This is what we all really need to do. He said, "Who is an enlightened Muslim?" That's the title. Who is an enlightened Muslim? He says it doesn't work that you import outside ideas into your culture, like import some Western ideas, any ideas, and try to replicate them in your culture, which is very different. He said it should be the values of the culture that should generate those ideas that will reform us, not borrowing. Allama Iqbal did the same thing. He was so critical of the West with some solid proof, because he had lived in the West. He knew both. And so Ali Shariati's article is, you must read that. It's like an appendix. I wish it were like one of the central chapters, but it is still there, and it is a very thought-provoking and hopeful article because it can be done. After this program is over, Tashi Bhai suggested that we convene a little discussion, open discussion, as to what can be done in the light of all this heartbreaking news and the collection of all these facts, their interpretation, the diagnosis. What is it that we can do? Now, I was reminded, yesterday we were at this international mushaira, and the guest speaker was Mir Imran, a scientist. And I was just intrigued by the possibility. It kept me awake for a few hours because I was thinking, what can we do? The first thing that came to my mind was the vision of our brother Sayyid Rifat Mahmood. And I remembered he had just invited me to join United Muslims of America. And he just said, okay, now you are on the... I used to say I'm busy or I have this to do or that. He said, now you are a member of the board. You have to come. And he put together 3 pages of this vision, what can be done. They're amazing. So I had to get up. I knew I was coming and sharing time with you. I said, I better find those 3 pages. I had saved them, I knew, along with his book, which I read with a great deal of interest. Similarly, very important book. It is called The American Revolution as Affected by Muslim Nations. Very important book too. So I found those. So after we are finished with this session, if you have time, please stay, and we will just talk about the vision of Sayyid Rifat Mahmood, how we can extricate ourselves from the mess we are in. If we allow others to speak for ourselves, we will never be able to see the truth told about us. The first thing that the Orientalist mentality does is take control of your story. You no longer tell your story. It is others who tell your story, distort it, package it attractively, and people, common people, they buy it. they have no better resource to question it. So this book is also very important because of this contribution. Now, we don't have a budget of $150 million, which our systematic opponents have. The anti-Islam, Islamophobic organization, the group of 7 active ones, have a budget of 150 million full-time people doing it for them. And here we have just attempts, like Ghazali Saab's attempt, my attempt to create courses at City College. By the way, I am very proud of the fact that without a single fundraiser, I have created a certificate in Middle Eastern and North African studies. And I'm very happy that it has taken off. And I have been teaching in person. Literature is my field, right? Main field, my PhD is in English literature. But I said, well, that is not really what I want to do. I teach that if I Shakespeare or something big, or I teach it political literature. But I also teach a course on Islam, and that was because even in my colleagues there was no information. So I created the club. And then from next semester, I am going to teach it online because many of my friends and colleagues and some other people who work or teach at that time, they couldn't take the class. So I am very happy. The little bit we can do, all of us, in our own capacities, we should do. And I refer back to my brother Tashir Zahir's words, that we have to do something on our own. Whatever we can do, we have to participate. So I am going to just stop here and we'll continue the discussion in the session after that. I, of course, have a lot to say, but I will, of course, know that you have a limit. And before you reach that limit, I'd like to remove myself from here. Thank you very much.
If you count one clap for the work that he has done, I think it is a little bit more. And when I meant that we are fortunate to have someone of this caliber amongst us, I meant every word of it. It's the people like that in our community that make us feel proud. We look around and we don't see this type of work. So whoever does it, in whichever capacity, I think we must acknowledge that and applaud them for doing that and try to emulate, try to do what little we can in our own capacities.